Two brothers, one sacred oath, and the brutal war that shattered it. The vow was sworn under the open sky, with the eternal blue of Tengri as its witness.
Temujin and Jamukha.
They had exchanged gifts, sacred knuckle bones and a whistling arrow, and they had declared themselves Anda, blood brothers, a bond that meant more than blood, a promise to share one fate, one soul, one life. They were, in spirit, two halves of a whole, destined to rule the steppe together. But destiny is a cruel and fickle thing. It does not share. Years later, Temujin, who was not yet Genghis Khan, had returned from the Murkit War. He had stared into the abyss of failure and returned not just with his wife, Borte, but with a new, terrifying authority. He had forged an alliance out of desperation, but he was building an army out of an idea. This idea was simple, and it was revolutionary. It doesn't matter who your father was. It only matters who you are. It matters if you are loyal. It matters if you are brave. To Jamukha, this idea was not just wrong, it was poison. Jamukha sat in his great white gur, the air thick with the smell of rich silks and boiled mutton. He was surrounded by the sons of Khans, men whose names had echoed across the steppe for 100 generations. He represented a world that was comfortable, predictable, and pure. Power to him was not something you earned in the mud. It was something you were. It was in your blood, your bones, your name. The son of a Khan became a Khan. The son of a shepherd remained a shepherd. He looked across the plains at Temujin's camp, and what he saw was not just a rival. He saw chaos. He saw dirt where purity should be. He saw commoners, no cur, being given the honor and respect once reserved for true nobility. He saw his own world, the only world that mattered, beginning to crack. The memory of the Anda vow, that sacred childhood promise, now felt like a betrayal. It was a source of burning, private shame. The boy he had loved as a brother had grown into the man who was tearing down the very sky above his head.
Jamukha didn't just break the Anda vow. He shattered it. The greatest heartbreak in Mongol history was about to begin, and it would be written in blood. This is the battle of the 13 sides. This is not a war for land. It is a war for the soul of a people.
The steppe began to choose. It was a silent, creeping choice, made not in great councils, but in the dead of night. Imagine the scene repeating in gurs across the land. A single warrior cleaning his bow, looking at his hungry children, and then at the arrogant, well-fed noble who commanded his clan. It was the choice of a young, ambitious man with no name who heard whispers on the wind. The whispers spoke of Temujin. They said Temujin shared his spoils. They said he promoted the man who charged first, not the man with the longest lineage. They said he listened to the lowest shepherd as if he were a chieftain. He was offering something that no Khan had ever offered before, a future, a chance, a way to become. This idea was a spark in dry grass. Across the steppe, men began to move. They packed their meager belongings, gathered their families and their small herds, and they rode. They rode away from the clans they were born into, away from the masters they were bound to, and they rode toward Temujin's banner. They were voting with their horses. This was the division. It was not a line on a map. It was a fracture in the Mongol mind. On one side was Jamukha, the past. He was the champion of the aristocracy. He promised stability, tradition, and the comfort of knowing your place. He drew the great, powerful, and ancient clans to his side, the Taichiut, the Jadaran, the Old Guard. They gathered around him because they were terrified of what Temujin was building. He was their bulwark against a world turned upside down. On the other side was Temujin, the future. He was the champion of merit. His camp was a messy, chaotic, vibrant collection of outcasts, adventurers, defeated clans, and ambitious commoners. It was a frightening, unpredictable, and thrilling place to be. He didn't promise comfort. He promised glory. He promised that a man's worth would be weighed on the scales of his own deeds. This division was unbearable. The steppe could not endure two opposing ideas of what it meant to be Mongol. Jamukha saw his power base, his entire world eroding day by day. Every warrior who rode to Temujin's camp was a personal, public rejection of his right to rule. He had to crush this idea. He had to crush the man who carried it. Temujin, for his part, knew he could not run forever. He had built this new thing, this ulus, this nation of followers. Now he would have to protect it. He organized his followers into a new, revolutionary structure, not by clan, but by military unit, the 13 Sides, or Kure. It was a formal declaration that the old tribal ways were dead. The steppe was now two massive, armed camps watching each other across the plain. The air was thick with the coming storm. The choice had been made. Now blood had to be spilled to confirm it.
The political tension had become a taut bowstring, vibrating with a low, deadly hum. It could not last. It needed only a single violent twitch to snap. That twitch came from Jamukha's camp. It wasn't a formal declaration of war. It was something far more personal, more insidious. A raiding party, led by one of Jamukha's kinsmen, thundered down on Temujin's herds. This was not a simple, common theft of cattle, a normal part of steppe life. This was a calculated message. The raiders didn't just take the animals. They found a follower of Temujin, a man who had sworn his loyalty to the new Khan, and they murdered him. They left his body for the wolves. The news arrived in Temujin's camp like a bolt of ice. The silence that fell over his followers was not fear. It was the cold, heavy silence of expectation. Every man turned his eyes to Temujin. This was the test. This was the moment his entire philosophy was put on trial. He had promised his followers a new life. He had promised them protection. He had promised them justice. If a man could be slaughtered without consequence simply for choosing him, then his new world was a lie. His ulus would dissolve like snow in the spring. His promise would be revealed as the empty boast of a weakling. He had no choice. To fail to act was to die. To fail to seek retribution for the blood of his follower was to admit that Jamukha's world was the real one, and his was just a dream. The time for building was over. The time for fighting had begun. Jamukha was satisfied. He had forced his rival's hand. He was eager for this fight. He sat in his gear and boasted to his nobles. "The Onda is weak. He is a collection of rabble and broken men. We will sweep him from the steppe in a single day." He gathered his massive coalition, a glittering sea of aristocratic banners. He possessed superior numbers, superior equipment, and the crushing weight of traditional authority. He viewed this coming battle as a simple, foregone conclusion. It would be a quick, surgical removal of a political cancer. It would be an execution. The armies converged, pulled by the inescapable gravity of their leaders' ambitions. This was the point of no return. The fields of Dalan Balzhut awaited.
For Jamukha's men, they were fighting to protect their world. For Temujin's men, they were fighting for the right for their world to even exist.
The sound was a low, continuous rumble, felt in the chest before it was heard by the ear. It was the sound of tens of thousands of horses, moving as one. The scale of the mobilization dwarfed anything the steppe had seen in generations. This was not a raid. This was a war of nations. Jamukha's army was a moving city, a sprawling, chaotic, and magnificent host. The banners of the old clans, the Taichiut, the Jadaran, the Merkit remnants hungry for revenge, created a forest of silk and horsetail. Their camp at night was a sea of campfires, echoing with the sounds of feasting, boasting, and the loud, arrogant confidence of inherited power. They were the magnificent host of the old way. Temujin's force, by contrast, was a coiled serpent. It was visibly smaller, leaner. It moved with a terrifying, compact efficiency. His camp was tight, quiet, and disciplined. The sentries were alert. The men were not feasting, they were sharpening their blades, checking their bowstrings, their faces etched with the grim, silent determination of those who know they are outnumbered. This was the physical manifestation of his new way. This was Temujin's genius in action. His 13 sides were his laboratory for a new way of war. He had instilled a discipline unseen in traditional tribal warfare. His orders were absolute, no looting until the battle was won. Absolute, unquestioning obedience to the chain of command. He had organized them using his revolutionary decimal system. Units of 10 who answered to a captain of 10. 10 of those captains answered to a captain of 100. 10 of those answered to a captain of 1,000. It was a pyramid of loyalty, and its peak was Temujin himself. It didn't matter what tribe you came from. You were now part of a unit. A Borjigin fought alongside a man from a defeated clan, both bound by a new, fiercer loyalty to their captain, and through him to Temujin himself. Jamukha, however, felt the simple, brutal power of numbers. He was confident his noble-born cavalry, men who had treated war as a sport since childhood, would easily shatter Temujin's collection of noker and commoners. His strategy was simple: a massive frontal crushing assault, a hammer to smash the serpent. The two armies met in the territory known as Dalan Balzhut, the 13 thickets. The name was an omen. The terrain was complex, a strategic puzzle. Rolling hills of open grassland, perfect for a cavalry charge, were suddenly broken by dense brush and deep, hidden ravines. It was a landscape perfect for concealment, for ambush, for confusion. Temujin, the tactician, hoped to use this broken terrain to his advantage, to bleed Jamukha's numbers, to lure him into a trap where his disciplined, flexible units could outmaneuver Jamukha's bulky, aristocratic formations. But Jamukha, for all his arrogance, was also a brilliant commander. He understood the traditional ways of war. He understood the power of the hammer blow. He brought his massive numbers to bear, intending to end the civil war in one sweeping, decisive day. The air grew heavy and still. The banners of the rival khans stood opposite each other. The psychological pressure on Temujin's men was immense. They looked across the field at the army of the real Mongols. They were the outcasts. They were the rebels. They were fighting not just for their lives, but for their very validation. And as the signal horns blew, a deep guttural cry, the thunder of the Mongol civil war began.
The first sound was a shriek. The sky turned black. Tens of thousands of arrows arched upwards, blotting out the sun,
before falling like a deadly, whistling rain. This was the opening breath of the battle. Temujin's 13 sides held their formation. They fired in disciplined, coordinated waves, a technique they had drilled relentlessly. They loosed, drew, and loosed again, a machine of flesh and horn, trying to slow the tidal wave that was Jamukha's army. But Jamukha's army was a force of nature. His plan was brutally simple and brutally effective: overwhelm. He didn't try to be clever. He didn't need to be. He directed his vast coalition to execute a wide, powerful envelopment, a pincer movement, using his sheer numerical advantage to wrap around Temujin's flanks. He intended to trap the entire force against the natural thickets, to pin them and to annihilate them. Temujin's forces fought with the unparalleled desperation of men who had everything to lose. They fought for their new status, for their families, for the man who had given them a name. They had the discipline, they had the motivation, but they did not have the weight. As the hours of brutal, hacking, close-quarters combat wore on, the air filled with the coppery smell of blood and the screams of men and horses. Jamukha's strategy began to take its inevitable toll. The pressure on Temujin's flanks became unbearable. His lines, once so firm, began to bend. Then, in one section, they tore open. Jamukha's noble warriors, sensing victory, poured into the gap. The climax of the battle was a chaotic, swirling melee. Temujin himself, fighting in the heart of his men, was suddenly in mortal danger. Separated from the bulk of his command, he was cornered, surrounded by a frenzied, howling pack of Jamukha's fiercest warriors. They all saw him, they all knew him, and they all hungered for the glory of killing the upstart Khan. This was the moment of Jamukha's greatest military triumph. The battle was won. But in that exact moment, the meritocracy paid its ultimate dividend. Jamukha's aristocratic warriors fought for personal glory, each man for himself. Temujin's followers fought for him. His trusted Noker, the men he had raised from nothing, saw the danger. In an act of legendary, selfless loyalty, Jelme, one of his 4 hounds, saw his Khan about to be cut down. He became a whirlwind of protective fury, crashing his horse into the attackers, shielding Temujin with his own body. He took the spears meant for his master, buying Temujin the precious seconds he needed. He even sacrificed his own horse to secure a path for his Khan's escape. This single act of loyalty was more valuable than any tactical victory. It was the living proof of Temujin's entire philosophy. His men would die for him, not because of his blood, but because of his bond. Temujin's heart broke as he saw the battle was lost. He was forced to order a retreat. It was a harrowing, desperate maneuver, a fighting withdrawal under heavy pursuit. But it was not a rout. This is the critical distinction. Jamukha's army, in victory, was already becoming a disorganized mob, beginning to loot. Temujin's army, even in defeat, pulled back as a unit. They reformed their ranks in the chaos, covering each other's retreat, and vanished into the darkness of the night, saved from annihilation by their structured units and their selfless, personal loyalty. Jamukha stood on the field of Dalan Balzhut, victorious. He had defeated his rival, and in his mind reaffirmed the power of the old nobility. Yet as the sun set over the bloody plains, he had only defeated the army. He had failed to defeat the idea. And the consequences of his victory would soon prove far deadlier than any defeat. The psychological turning point of the Mongol Civil War did not happen with the clash of swords. It happened in the chilling silence after. Jamukha stood on the battlefield, breathing in the scent of his victory. He was triumphant. He had vanquished his rival. He had secured tradition. And now, he believed, he must teach the entire steppe a final, absolute, and unforgettable lesson about the cost of disobedience. He had captured several dozen of Temujin's most loyal warriors, men who had been captains of 10 or captains of 100, the very men who had risked their lives for the meritocratic dream. To uphold the old, pitiless law of vengeance and to send a message of pure, unadulterated terror to anyone else who might ever consider defecting, Jamukha ordered a horrifying, indelible act. He commanded that 70 captured young men be stripped, bound, and publicly executed. He would not grant them a clean warrior's death by the sword. He ordered them boiled alive in 70 massive iron cauldrons. This was Jamukha's greatest error. It was an act of such profound theatrical savagery that it transcended war and entered the realm of pure tyranny. It was not seen as justice. It was seen as an unspeakable crime against the dignity of a warrior, a violation of the unspoken codes of the steppe. Jamukha was so consumed by his aristocratic rage, so desperate to erase Temujin's new world, that he chose terror over political sense. He believed fear was the only true foundation of power. The news spread like wildfire. The sight of the boiled men, the smell that hung over the victorious camp, didn't break Temujin's remaining loyalists. It forged their resolve into something harder than steel. More importantly, it horrified Jamukha's own followers. Nobles and commoners in Jamukha's army, though victorious, watched in disgusted silence. They had come to fight a war for tradition, not to witness a massacre. They asked themselves a chilling, subconscious question. If he does this to his enemies, to fellow Mongols, what will he do to us if we falter? Is this the tradition we are fighting to protect? The tactical loss was now, instantly, Temujin's greatest moral victory. Jamukha's oaths turned poison. The power, the authority, the legitimacy he had gained from the battle, it all evaporated overnight. Warriors would rather follow a defeated man who showed restraint and valued his soldiers than a victorious tyrant who treated them as disposable props for his gruesome displays. In a stunning, almost unbelievable reversal, the tide of defections began, but this time it flowed away from the victor and toward the vanquished. Temujin had not won the battle, but he had just won the future.
Temujin, regrouping in the protective embrace of his old ally, Ong Khan of the Karait, saw the evidence of Jamukha's self-destruction firsthand. His camp, at first a battered refuge for his defeated 13 sides, suddenly began to swell. Men started arriving, at first a few, then dozens, then hundreds. They were defectors. They were men who had fought for Jamukha at Dalan Balzhut, men who had won and who were now fleeing the victor as if he were a plague. They came to Temujin's camp, laid down their arms, and pledged their loyalty. They had seen the two futures, and they chose the one that offered justice, not terror. The new Mongol dawn was not a celebration. It was a profound, quiet realization. Temujin understood in that moment that his discipline and his restraint, even in defeat, was his greatest political weapon. He immediately used his newly solidified moral authority to formalize the revolutionary changes. He didn't just welcome the defectors, he integrated them. He shattered their old tribal units and mixed them into his own, promoting the defectors and the loyal survivors of Dalan Balzhut based only on their skill, regardless of their original clan.
He didn't just reward them with horses or sheep. He gave them status and command. He accelerated the dismantling of the old clan aristocracy, making it clear to all who could hear the sole path to power and honor in his ulus was through personal loyalty to him. This was the true birth of the Mongol Empire's military machine. It was a nation-state built on a contract, a psychological covenant that every man could understand. You give me absolute service and loyalty, and I will give you eternal protection, opportunity, and respect. Your past does not matter, only your future with me. Jamukha's victory had only confirmed that the old world was dying, that it was morally bankrupt and sustained only by terror. Temujin's humane acceptance of the defeated and even his enemies' defectors proved that the new world, one based on a clear code of conduct and justice, was ready to rise. Temujin was no longer just a Khan fighting for survival. He was now, in fact and in spirit, the leader of a burgeoning nation.
The Battle of the 13 Sides failed to end the war, but it accomplished something far more profound. It shattered the old world. Jamukha's traditional authority, the entire aristocratic system built on noble blood and ancient clan loyalties, was irrevocably broken. The forces of tradition had won the battle, but they had lost the foundation of their power. Their code was revealed as nothing more than brutal, savage, and self-serving terror. Temujin had faced his sworn brother, been defeated in the field, been forced to flee for his life, yet he emerged from the defeat stronger than he ever had been. He now commanded the largest, most dedicated, and most morally unified force the steppe had ever seen. He had proven a fundamental truth. An idea is stronger than an army. A vision of justice and opportunity will always, in the end, defeat a reality of terror and oppression. But the victory was incomplete. Jamukha escaped the aftermath of his own poisoned victory, wounded, humiliated, and seething with an aristocratic rage that had now curdled into pure, venomous hatred. He would spend the next decade maneuvering and plotting. He remained the constant, deadly shadow over Temujin's rise.
Temujin now commanded a new ulus, a new people. But greater enemies still stood. The Taichiut, the cruel tribe that had once enslaved him and forced him to wear the wooden kang, still controlled vast territories. And his powerful, fickle ally, Ong Kong of the Kiryat, the man who had been his father's Anda, was watching Temujin's rise with a new, dangerous jealousy.
The civil war had tested the man. The coming wars would forge the leader of the world. The personal fight was over. The fight for the world was just beginning. If you found this deep dive into the Mongol Civil War compelling, please support the channel with a like. It truly helps us create more content like this. This is only one chapter in a much larger saga. If you're just joining us and want to witness the full story from the beginning, from Temujin's first escape to the brutal Merkit War, the link to the complete series playlist is in the description below. To follow Temujin on the next step of his journey and ensure you don't miss the next chapter in this epic, subscribe and click the notification bell. And finally, if you know someone else who appreciates this kind of deep narrative history, please share this video with them. Now let us know in the comments, what single trait, cunning or courage, do you think was most responsible for saving Temujin at Dalan Balzhut?